Hello, Herman here with a new video in the ClearPass workshop series where I built the ClearPass deployment from scratch and integrate with Wired, Wireless, Active Directory and much more. In a previous video we covered the different scenarios for guest and that was because we want to do a wired guest, and today it's time to build our wired guest. Very briefly go through the steps. So what we will need to do is have a MAC authentication to return the guest-cp role to redirect to the captive portal. Then the client will do the redirect, self-registration, login. Then we need to create a web authentication service to trigger a COA port bounce. And after that the switch port will go down, go up. It will trigger a new MAC authentication, and then we need to do the same MAC caching like we did for the wireless. And based on that, we can allow access to the guest role for that user. And then the user will have internet access. Let's get started and build that. We need to do a few things and decided for this episode to do them all manually. So not using wizards. We did wizards for the wireless. The wizards are maybe not so appropriate for the wired. So we will do it manually. First, get the captive portal built. So here is our guest page. So go to the guest, then configuration, the self-registrations, and we have our wireless guest already. So let's create a copy of that one. Wired. And call that wired guest. So this will be the page name. Then we go in, and I think most of it will be okay. We just need to do some here on the vendor settings. So as mentioned in the previous video, we will not do controller initiated for the wired, but we use server initiated. Basically that's it. And we need to do another thing, and that is because we do the port bounce, we need to have a login delay. So the login delay, probably it will be 20 seconds or so. Let's put it to 20 seconds. So these are the two things that we need to change. So let's test this page. Let's go to the self-registration page. Register for an account. And if we now press login, we see something, required parameters are unavailable. And this is because this is based on the MAC address. And we need to have a MAC address, so we can simply overcome that. So what we can do is launch it again. So this is just for testing. Then here at the end you do ampersand MAC equals. And then basically any MAC address will work. From now it has a MAC address. If you see that message parameters missing, then probably it's that. And now we can see that we have an invalid username or password. And this is the moment that we should go back to the ClearPass Policy Manager, and we see here that we have a web authentication because it's now the client going to the ClearPass, doing the authentication, then the ClearPass will send a COA. So that's why we need to create a web authentication request. So there's not so much info here. So let's create that web authentication service. So go to our services. Add a new one, web-based authentication. Okay, now this is default for now. For the authentication, the sources, we need to have the guest user repository because that's where the guest accounts are created. Here under the role mapping, we can probably take the same one we have here. So not this one, but this one. Then under the enforcement, we need to create a policy, and we need to create a new enforcement policy. So this is a WebAuth enforcement. The default profile, we do an AOS-CX switch port bounce because there's nothing really what we can do else. Then here we have the rules, and for now let's simply create an simple one. So if the tips rule equals user authenticated, so everyone authenticating to the guest database, then we do a switch port bounce. Let's first see if that works. Save this one. We need to select that one. So let's save this one. So now it's here on the bottom. So that's good. Let's try again. And now you can see that we are signed in. We have that countdown that I discussed before. It's just that at this point we don't have any MAC authentication or port bounce. Okay, let's have a look in the access tracker. So now we see a success here under the input. You see that we have the bound switch port. We are user authenticated. Then here under the computed attributes, we have something here. So the ClearPass page name equals wired guest. Let's make the service a bit more specific. So application ClearPass page name equals wired guest. Let's also in the enforcement, because what we need to do is similar like we had with the wireless guest. So let's have a look at the wireless guest service. So that's this one. What we do here is we send all this MAC caching information and update the endpoint. And we want to do the same for our MAC authentication policy here. So let's modify this. Put in these post-authentication enforcements. So these are the same that are in the wireless. Just copy and mimic that behavior. Awesome. Good. So now let's have a look again. So close this one. Launch the self-registration page. Accept. Login. You're logged into the network. And if all is good, we now should have here an account. So we have the account activated, and here under the access tracker, we see that we have an accept and we are pushing all these attributes. And if we now check in the endpoint, which now is the 000 because we mimicked the MAC address, we should see now that we have the MAC auth expiry and the username and the guest role ID. So similar to what we had on the wireless. Next step is that we need to incorporate this in the MAC authentication, because at this point we need to do MAC authentication and at this point as well. So for unknown devices, we need to redirect to the guest CP, and for MAC cached devices, we need to redirect to the guest role and have full internet access. Okay, let's go for that. So let's check our services. Let's filter here on the wired. This is our MAC authentication service, and if we have a look at it, it will do authentication against the MAC endpoint user repository. We have our role mapping here, and we have our enforcement. And for unknown devices, we end up in the profiler role, and this is also where my device ended up before. So if I check again, here I see profiler roles. This is where we need to change some of the logics. Let's first check the role mapping. This is the current role mapping. If I compare that to the role mapping that we have on the wireless one, configuration, services. So that's this one. Here we have the role mapping where we are checking the MAC caching. So we are checking the endpoint repository. If there is a unique device count, then we check the time source. We check the guest user if the account is not expired and if it is enabled, and then we create the MAC caching role. So let's do the same here. I did prepare that already, this one. So basically this adds the same as we had before. Then here in the enforcement we need to make some changes, so let's change that as well. Rules, and then here in the end, instead of the profiler, we will return the captive portal redirect, of course, this one. And from that point on, we can do profiling from that VLAN as well. Profiling will still work. And we need to create a role that if we have MAC caching, so that was done in the role mapping, we need to return the guest profile. So that's returning a profile named guest. Let's move this one up and let's save this. So that's on the ClearPass side. Now we need to do things on the switch side as well. So we need to create some policies. So we need to have the guest CP role, which has the captive portal, and we need to have the guest role. So the guest role is very simple. It just assigns the guest VLAN name. The port access role for the redirect, it has some more things. So it has a captive portal profile, and that's this captive portal profile, which does a redirect to the guest wired.php. Let me check if that's the correct URL. So launch. So that's this URL. Let's paste it there so we have the exact correct, and not on the publisher, but the URL, I think it was okay. And we have as well a policy, and in this policy, this captive portal policy, we have a class clearpass-web, which allow access to the ClearPass server. So you can see I allow to all of the IP addresses of my ClearPass server on port 443, which is HTTPS. And I allow DHCP, which was configured before. So I have it here. So that's the DHCP class. The DNS class will allow traffic DNS only to my DNS server. So that's pretty secure. And in the end, we have a web traffic redirect action on web traffic. And that's all traffic to port 80 and port 443. So with 443, you will get certificate warning. So normally it will trigger on port 80 only. Good, let's have that configuration and put it in. And now let's look up. I think it's all accepted, so that's good. Now we have that roles. Show port access clients. Good, so we have a failure now on this client. So let's have a look now on the client. Let me unplug the device and plug it in again. Cable unplugged. And the cable is plugged. We already see the redirect. So that's nice. Let's first check here. Here we are in the guest CP role. So that's all good. And now let's here check in the access tracker. What we see is that we have a MAC authentication and we are returning the captive portal profile. And that's because we didn't have any of the role mapping. Guest CP is fine there. Okay, now let's go through the self-registration. Let's sign in. So now we should have the network unplugged. So that's the port bounce. You see the logging in. Please wait, it's still running. And this might need some tweaking. So probably we need to put it on 25 or 30 seconds. But unfortunately we are still on the captive portal profile. So let's have a look here in the new authentication. Check. So the web authentication. And this captive portal, and as you can see, we don't have the MAC authentication role. So let's here check the request. So that's all good. Check the authorization attributes, the computed attributes. And we do see the MAC auth expiry, so that's good. But I think we had some other rules in there. We were checking the endpoint repository unique device count. So that's not in there. For some reason. Then we have here the time source, now DT, and the guest repository. You can see these are missing, and that's all correct. That's because we didn't add these as authorization sources in our service. So let's do that. Here on service, here we can tick authorization, and authentication will always happen, but it can be that we need to have additional stuff for authorizations. Attributes here for the endpoint repository are pulled in here as well. And we had the time source database, and we need to use the guest user repository because these are the entries that were checked. Let's see if that solves the issue. Register. Let's also change the countdown timer. Log in. There we see the network cable is unplugged. So we are connected again, so we could have used 25 seconds. And now we see the redirect. And we are redirected, so that looks pretty good. Let's have a look as well here. So we have the guest profile and we have the MAC caching here as well. So This looks pretty good, and that's what we did in this episode. We basically replicated the guest authentication from what we had on the wireless with controller-initiated login. We now replicated that to the wired, where initially we sent a captive portal redirect. Then we have a web authentication for the controller initiated. This came in over radius. Here we have a web authentication that will set all the parameters for the MAC caching, and it will bounce the switchboard. And then once the client is back, then we see that because we have that MAC caching role, that we get to the guest profile, and that allows us to have guest access. I hope this was useful. If so, please press the like button, and if you have any questions, there's a comment section under the video where you can put your comments, or you can put them in the Airheads community. And please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks a lot for watching.